There are many things in life both which you can and can't control, and extreme ownership is a way of thinking about these things that is most beneficial to you. If you're new here, my name is Jarle, and on Early Owl we learn how to take responsibility. I got this phrase from a book title. The book is literally called Extreme Ownership, and it's written by Jocko Willink, who is some ex-Navy SEAL person. I'm not really going to talk about the book. I have read it, but it's a while ago. But from what I remember, it is, it's written by an ex-military guy, and it is more about like leadership and becoming a leader in business and how you can apply the lessons from war in business. I want to focus more on kind of the personal aspect of ownership and responsibility, and maybe how you can apply that with a bit of a softer touch. There are 3 different areas I think it can be useful to think this way: blame, responsibility, and yourself. Blame basically comes down to what happens after something bad has happened. So someone has made a mistake or someone has done something wrong, and then blame is kind of about figuring out who did what wrong and who is to blame. I don't really like the word blame here because it has a very negative connotation to it, and I'm not saying that you should blame yourself and feel bad about it. I'm more just saying that you should look away from blaming others and try to take on more responsibility yourself. Regardless of the situation, if you're at all connected to it, there's almost definitely something you could have done to reduce the chance of this negative thing happening. Let's just say you have a simple example. You have a manager and an executor. And just as I'm saying this, I realize that an executor is probably someone who executes people, not someone who executes tasks. But let's just roll with it. So you have the executor who is supposed to do something and the manager who's supposed to facilitate that happening, and it doesn't get done. Now, there's a million different ways to throw blame back and forth and in all sorts of directions here. The manager can just say, I told the person to do it and it didn't happen, so it's not my fault. And the executor can say it was lacking in communication, it didn't go through the right channels, there was a problem with the third party. There's a million different reasons why something that was supposed to happen didn't happen. And I think since we are generally quite protective of our own self-image and our own ego, the natural gut reaction is to kind of think about what the other person did wrong and ignore the things that we did wrong or could have done better. There are a couple of positive things that can come out from focusing more on your own responsibility instead of shifting blame. But I think another big reason for why this is important is that there's very little positive to be had from shuffling around blame. It's more just about people protecting their egos or trying to protect their reputation, but at the end of the day, it just leads to worse results for everyone involved. One big plus side is I think it just makes you an easier person to work with, whether that is as a manager or as someone more independent doing their own tasks. If you are someone who takes responsibility when something goes wrong and communicate that clearly and communicate how you could have prevented it from happening or what you can do in the future to avoid that happening, that builds a mutual sense of respect to whoever else you're working with. But if you instead just shift the blame to other people or other factors, then that erodes that respect. And everyone can shift the blame sometimes because a lot of the time it is not your fault. But it is just something I think we are well served leaning more into the direction of taking more ownership. When something bad has happened, instead of just thinking about how did this happen, it can be helpful to think about how could I prevent this from happening in the future. Another big factor here is that you don't learn anything from shifting blame. Like if you say, oh, I did everything right and the other person did the thing wrong and it's their fault, so I'm not going to change anything, then when the same thing happens again, you will just have the same excuse like, oh, if these people just did the right thing, then it wouldn't happen and everything would be fine. But in reality, there's probably something you can do on your end, whether it's taking more responsibility as a executor to just figure out things on your own or asking follow-up questions, or if it's taking more responsibility as a manager, making sure everyone is followed up properly, making sure everything is going according to plan. And I realize I'm talking a lot here just about executor and manager because this is an easy framework, but this does apply in pretty much any setting if you're working with other people. Like let's say you are on a group project with other students or you are in like some community house board. If you try to do something as a group and then someone else in that group didn't do their assigned task, then you could just be like, oh, we failed because the other person didn't do what they're supposed to and then just not learn anything from it. But instead, what you could do is realize, hey, maybe I could have followed up on that person. Maybe I could have asked if they needed help. Maybe there's something I could have done to help that person get over the hump. I said in my last video I didn't like adding caveats, but here I am adding more caveats, but that's okay. Just to add a little more fine-tuning to some of these points. So there are a few exceptions to how you want to think about extreme ownership when it comes to blame. First of all, you should not, as I said, blame yourself in terms of feeling bad about it. This isn't about like beating yourself up over something bad that has happened. It is about how you can improve and take lessons from the bad thing that happened. A second point is that this can depend a bit on the environment you're in. If it's very competitive and a toxic environment where people are just trying to get ahead, I can see this backfiring where you become just a doormat who people shift blame onto, which is not something you want to do. And similarly, when it comes to relationships, I do think it's a general good to extend your ownership. I kind of talked about this in the video about charitable interpretations, but basically just try to take a bit more responsibility than you feel like you deserve. But the same I said to toxic environments also applies to toxic relationships, where you do need to be aware of when lines are crossed or when things are not good for you. And you shouldn't just ignore those signs and just take all blame on yourself. And I'm also not saying that you should be completely oblivious to any other people who might be at fault in a specific negative scenario. Like if someone is actually not up to whatever job they're trying to do, then you need to be made aware of that. And if there's a consistent problem with a third-party thing, then you also need to be aware of that. So it's not that you should just ignore whoever else might be to blame. You might need to make informed decisions based on that. But in kind of the heat of the moment, after the thing has happened, then I think your main focus should be on what you can do to reduce the chance of this happening again. So blame is kind of after the fact and responsibility is then before the fact. So before something happens or before something needs to get done, the question is, how much are you responsible for? How I like to think of this is that we all have our little circle of responsibility, be that at work or with our studies or in our family or anything like that. So anything inside of this circle is things that are kind of your fault if they do or don't happen. And anything outside of this circle is anything that wouldn't be your fault or wouldn't be something that anyone else would think that you should have done if it doesn't happen. And the general advice here is I think you should just try to expand this circle a bit further than what people would expect of you in any scenario. There is a million different ways this can be applied in a work setting, but just the crux of it is to try to foresee problems that are not directly your responsibility and get ahead of them in a positive way. And I do think this taking more responsibility is helpful in pretty much all areas of life, not just work. Like if you're living with other people, then I think expanding your circle of responsibility is just good for everyone. Like the best environment is where everyone is living there takes a bit more responsibility than what they're actually responsible for. And similarly, if you have some dinner plans in the future with some friends, maybe nobody is going to blame you specifically for not setting it up and figuring out the schedules of everyone. But if you don't do it and nobody else does it, then there is a decent chance these type of plans just never happen. The main positive here is I do think people are going to notice and appreciate these efforts. Like if you're a new hire at the job and you manage to find and prevent or solve some problem that wasn't exactly what you were told to do, then that is generally going to reflect pretty positively. I do also think there is a bit of this mindset that just seeps into everything you do the more you lean into it, where if you're just used to seeing how you can improve things or how you can take a bit more responsibility, then you're going to be less likely to fall for traps where it's like not explicitly your fault, but maybe there's something extra you could have done. Now, a few adjustments to this. First of all, as I mentioned on the previous section about blame as well, if you're in a toxic work environment or in a toxic relationship, then leaning too heavily into this can just lead to being exploited, which isn't a good thing. I would say though, if you are in this kind of work environment and you feel like if you did a good job or you did something well, that you wouldn't get credit for it or that you would be, I don't know, shunned because you broke bureaucracy or something like that, then this is a very legitimate reason to try to look for another place to work. Another thing is that obviously you need to balance your responsibility and what you're taking responsibility for with how much time and effort and energy you want to put into this specific thing. Like, I'm not seeing this with work for myself, that when we started out and we were a small company with a small problem space, then I had a very wide circle of responsibility. The perfect example for me is Slack, where in the early days, when we were just a few people with relatively small problem space, I would generally pay attention to the different conversations going on. And then if someone had some specific problem that I could kind of see that they couldn't see because of my area of expertise, I would join the conversation and let them know. But now as the company has grown and we have more people with more potential problems, and I also have more responsibilities, I don't have as much time to keep up with all the conversations and just throw in my opinion here and there. Another example would be group projects. Like my first year when I was studying, I was only studying. So then I was happy to spend the extra time and effort in group projects, just trying to keep everyone afloat and just making sure everyone was organized and working on the right things. But then when I started working full time and kind of school was a secondary priority, I didn't put as much effort into just trying to improve the cohesion of the group as I had when I was doing it full time. The last area I wanted to talk about here is how you can apply extreme ownership to yourself. This is kind of the flip side of the coin of victim mindset. I originally wanted to make a video about victim mindset and how that is not always a great thing. But I kind of prefer making videos on positive things like, okay, this is a good mindset to have instead of this is a bad mindset to have. I do still think I'll make a video about victim mindset at some point, but for now, let's focus on what we should be doing, not what we should not be doing. So there's a couple of different areas I think you can apply extreme ownership to yourself in a good way. The first question is just to figure out what benefits you. Like, let's say you're trying to accomplish something and something completely out of your control and super horrible that just ruins your plans happens. Now, you can go on and on about how unfair this is and how this ruins everything and you couldn't have foreseen it, but all of these things aren't going to help you progress. Like, they're not going to make you any stronger or better. You're not going to learn from it. You're not going to basically get anything positive out of it other than kind of protecting your own ego or like just feeling better about yourself. But even the feeling better about yourself, I don't think is a good feeling better about yourself. But if you just focus on how unfair this is and how this shouldn't have happened, then this is almost certainly going to have a negative impact on anything you're trying to produce later in that area. If, on the other hand, you just focus on the things you are responsible for and the things you are controlling, and you just try to do them better again next time, then that is pretty much all you can do. This is definitely not easy to do always, though. Like, I remember when I was struggling with RSI, carpal tunnel issues in my hands, it was incredibly frustrating because I felt like I wanted to work and I could work mentally, but I was limited in my typing on my computer. And that just kind of killed my motivation anywhere else. So even though I'm saying you should just focus on what you can do and just not feel like a victim, it's not easy, but it is definitely the right way if you just want to get better results and feel happier in life. I also think it is a positive generally to take a bit more ownership of ourselves and the way we are or the way we're not. There's a quote I like about this, which I did take from The Virtue of Selfishness by Ayn Rand. And it's not meant as an endorsement of this entire book, but this is the one highlight I got out of this book, which I like quite a lot. And it's just a part of the sentence. And the quote is, "Never resigning oneself passively to the flaws in one's character." And I do think there is some deeper truth to that when it comes to things, especially things that are very personal or very close to you, or maybe a defining part of yourself, then we have a very easy time to either shift blame or look for solutions that are not internal to ourselves, or to kind of chalk these things up as immutable and there's no improvements to be made here. Basically anything that doesn't put you in the driver's seat of making it better. So if you want to become more confident or less scared of flying or be happier or less stressed, or you want to do better at work, or basically anything you could think of that you would want to improve in your life, the only person who could possibly be the arbiter of these types of things is you. Like, you might want to seek help, or you might want to change career, or you might want to quit your job, or you might want to get people out of your life. Like, there might be other people or other problems in these scenarios, but the only one who can really affect change is you. And the important parts to hone in on here is that it's not about what's true or what is false. It is about what's beneficial to you. Like, if you have all these unfair circumstances or all that's working against you, that might be true. But if you have something you want to do or something you want to accomplish or some way you can improve your life, then just giving up because these things are here isn't going to do anything for you. The only thing that's important here is that the only thing you can control is yourself and your actions and how you fix it. And if you just focus on the things you can't control, then nothing is going to happen. Whereas if you focus on the things that do control, then you will inevitably, almost no matter what the area is, be able to make some positive changes. And it's also not about how there's just some magical way to solve them or you can just will your way through them. The only thing is, again, going back to the quote, passively resigning yourself to flaws in your character. The only thing you don't want to do is just say, oh, this is unfair, I'm just not going to try, and then I'm not going to try anything. Or, oh, this is unfair, I'm just like this, and I just can't be any way else. The only thing you can do is just to not passively resign, and instead just try to apply yourself in whatever way feels appropriate for you with whatever situation you have at the moment. And then just continue doing that day by day. And even in the days when you don't, just have some hopes or plans in the future that you're going to get back to it. Okay, that was what I had to say about extreme ownership and how I try to think about it for myself. I'll link to some playlists here, where I talk about different self-development mindset type things. So if you like this video, check those out. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next Wednesday.